pulled out $848,383.14 cash, tax-free, within 18 months of my very first deal that I ever bought, no money down, owned the property, and I never looked back, and I never went back to work. How many people listening to this podcast right now would pay $7,800 a month to have $850,000 cash they could do whatever they want with?
The one and only J. Scott Scheel here with us, nationally known and renowned through his commercial academy, which to date, he's been able to train 100,000 plus entrepreneurs in the field of commercial real estate.
I went to work at 9 years old.
Wow.
Look, the only thing I can do is if I want something, I'm gonna have to provide it for myself. And with that, I started my first business at the age of 14. It was not the type of business I wanted to do, but I got into business.
Listen, this is what necessity and survival breeds. You will find a way.
You're gonna have to.
I've done things that are downright illegal at the start of my entrepreneurial journey.
Found myself at the age of 24, $500,000 in business debt, $100,000 in personal debt, credit destroyed, and lost everything I had gained up until that point in time in my life.
But what if that never happened?
Right?
Are we here?
No, we're not.
Are you still the Scott Scheel that we know?
And I've never shared that story before. I don't usually get that deep into this part of my origin story.
One deal, one time can change your life forever.
Not only is it just one deal one time, but literally one signature, one time can make you a millionaire in commercial real estate. Man, you can change the world. And so we show them how to make that happen.
Welcome to another episode of the Real Mentors podcast. As always, REAL stands for Real Examples, Altering Lives. And today in studio, I am grateful, blessed, and privileged to have the one and only J. Scott Scheel here with us. Mr. Scheel, as we'd like to call him teasingly, is quite the teacher in the world of commercial real estate. He's actually nationally known and renowned. He's a regular guest on platforms such as Forbes, the New York Times, and even more frequently on Fox Business. His baby, as I have come to call it, and how I know him is through his commercial academy mentorship program, which to date, he's been able to train 100,000 plus entrepreneurs in the field of commercial real estate. Accolades out the wazoo. I could go on and on about him, but I know just like myself, the thing he is most proud of and that keeps him grounded and waking up every day with purpose is that beautiful, amazing, and very large family that you have. Welcome to the show, Mr. Scott Scheel. How are you, sir?
Sean Martin, sir, God bless you, and thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you. I know we've been trying to put something like this together for a number of months, and glad that everything kind of worked out here this weekend. So now it's been a humbling journey. I appreciate all the accolades. It's hard to hear people talk about you, but in the end, we're really here to try and contribute to people's lives, give them an example that they can believe in, that gives them the confidence to be able to act. And that's really the key. Action is what'll get you going. Philosophy, education abounds, but action is in short supply.
Yeah.
And so what you, I think, were alluding to was, what is your catalyst? What will get you out of that bed motivated to fight through all of the things that we have to confront, all of the challenges that we know are going to come that we couldn't prepare for, to ultimately achieve the outcomes that we want? And for us both, it's our families. And, you know, I did a little differently than a lot of folks, differently than you. I decided to create a family later in life. And that was by design. A lot of people think, boy, you're doing this a little later than most people would. But I came from a family that really spawned a number of people who had gotten married at a very young age, high school sweethearts. They fell in love, wanted to be together, had a family, but I watched them struggle so mightily. And I did not want to go down that path. I wanted to hopefully be able to go out and achieve my platform, start to figure out how I would provide for my family first and foremost, and then get off of that rat race wheel, get out of the struggle, and be able to be more present for them. And I got to tell you, it's been one of the best decisions I've ever made. I mean, there's still struggles, of course. We got a crazy world, crazy economy, crazy politics, crazy financial institutions. But in the end, it's always been crazy.
Right.
And if you look back, 100 years, you'll see that it's been crazy for every generation that's had it. Everyone feels that it's never been as bad as it is. And in hindsight, you will look back on it with nostalgia and with praise and with, let's say, a little bit of wistful longing for it to be the way that it used to be, even though the world always kind of feels to a lot of people like it's coming apart at the seams.
Right.
That's where the opportunity to lead really comes in.
I think it's the narrative of the sky's always been falling, right? Since the beginning of time.
It's true.
Before Fox News or CNN or any other, news network that we can criticize, regularly and daily, multiple times a day.
Yes, sir.
And that just brings us to perspective, right? So you mentioned I started a family later than most, and I had the same feeling about my life because I didn't start until 39.
Yeah.
So it really is all perspective.
Yes.
And I always say that if you want to achieve something and faith is part of your mission or what really moves you, believe as if everything's in God's hands, but work as if everything's in yours.
I love it. That's the right philosophy. I couldn't agree with you more. We're both faith-based guys. And when we forget about what really actually provides for us, we can get out of control. We can feel stressed. We can feel overwhelmed. We just got to show up and do our part. If we do our part, creativity, inspiration, ideas, relationships that we couldn't have imagined come into our lives because we're continuing to find another way and press forward. When we try and do it all on our own shoulders, I've seen so many people fail doing it that way. Thousands of people, in fact. And it's a sadness to say that we've seen thousands of people fail, but over the trajectory of a 35-year career, that's really not that many, And long term, it really is about what are we really here to do, right? Everybody wants to talk about making money. Everybody wants to talk about making an impact. And certainly we want to do those things. But we always talk about in the end, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? And so we've got to make sure that we understand the reasons why we're doing the things that we do. And we're all tempted. Look, there's a way that I could really dominate this negotiation. I could crush this deal. And I could even win the game, the battle, the war, the whole shooting match. But the final tally isn't done here. It isn't based on your balance sheet. It isn't based on your personal scorecard. It's not based on your bank account. It's not even really based on the people that, you have supported and encouraged. Did you do your best? Did you really put it out there? Did you hold back? Were you selfish? Were you doing it for vanity? Right? And that's the tough one. It's hard to be, let's say, the founder, chairman, whatever in a room and to maintain that gratitude and that humbleness. And whenever I've lost that, God has dealt very directly with me, and I love that part of it. He smacks me quick, wakes me up. That's right. I'm not the main cause. I'm not the main focus. I'm actually not the one that's to be glorified here. We're here to glorify our nature to contribute. For me, Christ is my role model. And so, I'm in the process right now of trying to evangelize the folks who've been really successful through my platform in a way that's going to grant longevity to a platform that I've invested, nearly a quarter century of my life into. And it's not easy to evangelize. I mean, you see what Christ went through, and then you imagine what it's like to get people who are really profit motive driven to start to be a little more altruistic, right, and to give away the strategies, the tools, the techniques. And, that may not be necessarily the focus of some of your listeners today, that that they're so faith-based and all of that, but you have to remain true to yourself in order to feel the fulfillment when you achieve the outcome. And so many people are just focused on the outcome. Hey, if I make $1 million, 10 million, 100 million, $1 billion, if I have X number of assets under management or square footage, or if I, can do X and Y and Z for the people I love, then I've won. That's not really where it's at.
I think everybody has to find that out on their own.
Yeah.
So you mentioned ego, which we know from our mentor, Tony Robbins, is insecurity.
Yeah, it is.
Simply put. And we've all been chasing that vanity. We've all been chasing that significance. Yeah. Usually early on, the young man, that's the night, and he's out for it. And it's ironic because we see this in the Commercial Academy room with some of our members. Some guys you'll have conversations with, and you'll see yourself, your young self.
Yeah.
And as altruistic and as giving and as thoughtful as you can be, you may have that conversation, but it just doesn't dawn on that person.
Yeah.
They still feel like they've got the answer.
Yeah.
That happened to you, Scott, Sean, John, whoever.
Yeah.
But I've got it. I'm not going to let that happen to me.
Right.
And
right.
2 years later, they're like, I should have listened to Scott. I shouldn't have moved so fast. I shouldn't have borrowed so much capital. I shouldn't have over leveraged myself.
Yeah.
It's the age-old story.
It is.
But until you get smacked down and humbled in life, I think it's very hard to paint that picture, unless it's someone like who's mentored by you, who's really close to you,
Yeah.
who's really listening, or one of your children. And even then, with children, we know they're going to do what they see, not what we say.
That's right. There's so much of that will ultimately be the fruit of your example.
So let's talk about family. I want to bring it to, you live an intentional life.
Yes, sir.
Because you've done all the wrong things.
Yes.
You've corrected your mistakes. This part of your life is very intentional, but let's harken back to when it wasn't so intentional. Right. And that's the real value here of having someone of your caliber and your wisdom with us, is we want to extract the lessons.
Yes.
Just like I've been through my own, and I want to share the lessons. Now, whether or not they receive it, that's on them. The best
Correct.
we can do.
Couldn't agree more.
And you're the real deal. You lead with love.
I try.
You do.
Thank you.
You're humble. You'll take a compliment, but I know that you're not necessarily comfortable with it, but you know how to accept them. I'm always in a room and I'm looking for, is this guy the real deal, or is he's pitching me? And so many people are pitching. So and you're pitching too, but you're up there like, listen, I don't need your money. Yep. I don't want your money if you don't believe in this.
No.
And I noticed from very early on, because that's my gift to assess people because of all the crap I've been through.
Okay.
You're the real deal, and you lead with love. You mentioned family. Family is extremely important, and I want to take it back to your family and growing up here in Cleveland, because I know your story from humble beginnings.
Yes.
But I want you to share that with the audience. So you're a Cleveland guy, born and raised?
Born and raised right down on 69th and St. Clair, which is in a pretty tough neighborhood these days, but back in the day it was very ethnic, right? It was all sorts of little pockets of, folks from Eastern Europe, from Western Europe, the Italian group, the Irish group, you had the Slovenians, the Croatians, the Ukrainians, and they all just kind of came together. But there was a strong faith in those communities, right? And there was this different sort of wisdom that I think we've lost today, where heritage mattered. And today what's happening is that, everybody's trying to shed their heritage, their cultural uniqueness is something that isn't necessarily celebrated.
Right.
And, they'll throw people into a bucket. Well, you're black or you're white. Well, there's a lot of facets to that, isn't there?
As a Hispanic.
You're Hispanic, right? It's like, well,
Are you white Hispanic or black Hispanic? And I would always just put other. Like, I got a very dark grandmother, very dark grandfather, very light grandmother. Like, why do I have to be one or the other?
Right.
And they infiltrate that for sure.
And so what it is it's really from the beginning, you're kind of being segregated, and you're being segregated psychologically. And so we started there, very humble beginnings. My grandparents, who were first generation, came to America and they started businesses. And so 69th and St. Clair was a 3-unit multifamily apartment building with a little, storefront down on the street. And my grandfather started an electrical shop, and he would do motors for fans and things like that. My parents lived upstairs in a 0-bedroom apartment.
How does that work?
Right, exactly. So there was a kitchen and a living room, and you just slept in it. That was it. Wow. It was built in the 20s. And so they just all lived there, and across the hall was grandma, and across the other hall was the other aunt. And so about 6 months later, we moved out to the fancy suburbs. We got into a Ryan home, and they were the highfalutin ones who moved, out of, downtown. But unfortunately, my father got sick fairly early on. He had a heart attack, and he went on public assistance and disability. And the way that disability worked then, and I'm not sure that it's the same way today, but maybe it is, was that if you tried to get off of it and you'd had an incident or an injury, and his was a heart attack, if you tried to get off of it and you went back into the workforce, you could never get it again for the same condition. And so it really was a very limiting factor for me. He's a brilliant man, very smart, very well spoken. I credit him for all of my ability to speak and be eloquent in public, we used to play a game called Big Man Words, right? We didn't play baseball. We didn't play football. We didn't wrestle. We played Big Man Words. And he would teach me language, and he would give me the understanding, like, traverse means to cross, or excavate is to dig. You could just say dig it, but he wanted me to learn, this is excavation, son. And that vocal variety, that expanded vocabulary, which at the time was just a silly game and it was what we could play, actually became my career, which is pretty bizarre. And I didn't realize that being able to communicate with people effectively and with empathy and compassion and a little bit of encouragement was going to be the gateway to where I am today. But very humble. And so when he got injured, through that and lost his ability to work, we weren't able to sustain where we were. So, I can remember, weeks and weeks at a time, cold water. We don't have heat. We can't really eat. We went to the grocery store, we bought food, but this is going to have to last for 2 weeks. And so it's rationing. And I don't want to act like we lived in abject poverty, because that's not true. Right. But we were, pretending to be lower middle class. And if Grandpa wasn't chipping in and helping, we weren't going to make it. And that caused a lot of strain in the family. Mom didn't sign up for that. She signed up on board, had babies very, very, very young. My dad was 19 when he got married. My mom was 15, if you can imagine.
Wow.
And so they went to Kentucky with the blessings of both of their parents. They got married, mostly because back in the 50s, when they got married in 1955, that's what you did. When a woman left the house, she pretty much got married. And they wanted her out because too many mouths to feed. Right. So it became challenging because they did have these children and Dad couldn't afford it. And then we're trying to figure this stuff out. And, we're around all these other folks who are probably middle class, right?
Real middle class, and you were faking it.
Yeah, and my parents kind of they were living beyond their means,
right?
And so we kind of
even then they were keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak.
A little bit, because Mom she didn't want to live in the apartment building because she grew up in that, right? And so she's like, we got to get somewhere else. And they had this opportunity. I remember they spent $27,000 for this home in 1968, and that translates pretty well today. It's probably only worth about 10 times because property values here don't go crazy.
Right.
So it's probably a $250,000, $300,000 home today, which is pretty much an entry-level home here in Cleveland today. But it was new, and it was theirs, and they could do what they wanted with it, and they got excited, and they should have. And my dad was on this upward trajectory. And then he had this situation befall him. And I remember when it happened because everything changed in the household. We weren't able to do the things that we were aspiring to do.
How old are you at this time?
I was 9.
Okay.
It was the winter of 1977. Blizzard of 77. Someone had gotten stuck in a snowbank. Good Samaritan dad went out to try and help them while he's trying to get their car out of this big snowbank. Cardiac arrest because it was like negative 15 degrees outside and It's blowing and he's exerting himself. And, people didn't exercise or take care of themselves back then the way that they do today. It was really just becoming a thing. And so, you just went through all of this and, came home, cracked open his chest, open heart surgery. He's got the zipper on the front of his body. And it just changed the dynamic and the whole family construct. And again, this is not to sit there and belabor that point, but it started to generate those feelings of inferiority. Right. Like, you know what? It's not okay, and we're not going to be okay. And so you start to get a little insecure, not maybe so much emotionally, but from a perspective of being provided for.
Yeah.
And so I went to work at 9 years old.
Wow.
I'm going to contribute, right? So went and found a way to go knock on doors and sell newspaper subscriptions. I got a newspaper out, started caddying. And I'm like, look, the only thing I can do is if I want something, I'm going to have to provide it for myself. And, my parents at that point in time, from then on, really didn't ever provide anything from an entertainment perspective, anything from, I remember for the most part buying my own tennis shoes.
Yeah.
I remember lusting over Nike Cortez $55 tennis shoes back in, 1980. And I couldn't really kind of justify all the effort it would take to get those. But it got me to that point where I'd see these kids come in and they'd have back in the day, it was like an Izod. You had the little alligator on your shirt and you had the Nike tennis shoes. I couldn't afford those. I'm wearing plastic tennis shoes from Sears, and whatever we can get out of the dustbin from TJ Maxx, which was brand new concept back then. And so it was just one of those things where it's like, look, if anything's going to happen here, I'm going to have to do it. And I never allowed those things to really, truly define me. I was pretty much the youngest kid in the neighborhood. I was pretty much one of the smallest kids in the neighborhood. But I had outsized ambition. I didn't really have a chip on my shoulder, but I was always trying to figure out how I'm going to find the advantage. And where I found my advantage was in my ability to communicate, to share ideas, to lead people, and to get them to believe in an idea and to believe in themselves. And with that, I started my first business at the age of 14.
Wow.
And I didn't always use my powers for good. I'll tell you, we were making fake IDs.
There was a need and you were filling it.
There was a need, kids wanted it.
Entrepreneurs rarely follow the rules.
Well, it was a great learning experience. And now I'm in junior high school and getting into high school, and we're selling these things throughout the entire district. And at the time we invested in a color computer so we could print, which was a big deal back then in color. We had a laminating machine and all this other stuff. And I remember putting together this quasi-legal document that said, hey, the company was J&M Novelties. I was J, my cousin Mark was M. And we put these things together, and, we'd go running around on Fridays and we'd drop off these fake IDs to all these schools.
Wow.
And, they had to sign a waiver that said that this is fool your friends. It's only for novelty purposes. You're not going to do anything illegal with it. We thought we're covering our bases, right? And we did. And we never got any trouble for it, but it was just not. It was not the type of business I wanted to do, but I got into business.
Of course. I mean, listen, this is what necessity and scarcity and survival breeds.
Yeah.
You will find a way.
You're going to have to.
Now,
find a need and fill it, right?
Listen, I've done things that are downright illegal at the start of my entrepreneurial journey. So I cannot knock that. And that's what essentially builds character. What do you credit to your ability to take a situation like yours? What differentiated you from so many other people that struggle, they're just surviving, or they have that, even though you didn't claim to have a chip on your shoulder, maybe they have a chip on their shoulder. They have a real fire. They have a fuel. They have a reason that's driving them. But so many don't make it. Mm-hmm. What do you think at the tender age of 9 allowed you to keep going?
Yeah. I would say it was just this vision of being able to create a better life. We were always incredibly forward-thinking and creative. And I had an individual in my life who had come from far worse circumstances than myself. He was an uncle through marriage, married my mother's sister, and he had been in 42 foster homes, and he never knew his father. And he had a 6th grade education. And at this point in time, in the mid-70s, he had bought railroads, he was buying office and warehouse and retail buildings, he had owned restaurants, he was involved in energy. He even bought an amusement park, right? He's one of those guys who just came from nowhere and did this. Now, I watched how he did things. He was kind of a corporate raider. He'd give people some seed money so he could gain control. He wouldn't come through with the rest of the capital for the most part because they had hurdles to clear that were impossible to clear.
Right.
And then in the end, in a lot of instances, what he would do is he'd break apart the assets. He'd sell off the stuff he could sell. He'd take the bank accounts that he could. He'd collect any receivables that were there, and he'd default the payables. And so I watched him gain wealth through misery. And I thought, well, I like the idea of real estate. I like the idea of becoming financially empowered and independent, but I don't want to leave a wake of wreckage in my path. So I thought what I could do was, again, I could really try and lead. So I had these examples about these are good results, but not necessarily the way you want to do it. Because I think we all have to believe in our hearts that we're good. Right. Everybody's got a reason. He was able to justify it because what the system had done to him.
Right.
And how hard things were. And he's like, I'm going to figure this thing out. And, it's their own fault for putting themselves in this position. Had they met those requirements, they would have gotten all of the funding. But I knew better. And in fact, at one point in time, he hurt me. And it was the catalyst for me getting into this. He had backed a venture that I had with my cousin. We were importing and manufacturing computers from overseas. I was 21 at the time, and we were doing really well. And he was supposed to provide a credit line for us to be able to ramp up our inventory so we could deliver to government, education, military. And when you do those types of contracts, it's not COD, right? They pay you in 60, 90, government can pay you in 180
whatever
days.
They feel like.
Right, whatever they feel like it, because they're the 800-pound gorilla. And so without that line of credit, then the manufacturer cut us off. We couldn't meet the requirements. And then he kind of turned his ire towards us, put us out of business. And I found myself at the age of 24, about to turn 25, $500,000 in business debt, $100,000 in personal debt, credit destroyed, and lost everything I had gained up until that point in time in my life.
But you gained a very valuable lesson. And you also learned that family means nothing when it comes to business if you're not doing it the right way.
Yeah, well, and if you have a handshake agreement and you don't document it, everybody's going to remember what was said and what the intentions were differently. Because it's always easy to reshape something in the hindsight.
Oh, yeah.
2020, right? Vision looking backwards. So what we try and do is I've really learned, and one of my mantras for all of my clients and my folks that I mentor and friends is if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. It's a story that, it's a saying that comes out of the entertainment industry, right? In film or in theater, if we don't say it here, you're not allowed to say it up there.
No
if we tell you that
yeah.
you're supposed to be sitting at the table, don't say it when you're sitting over here on the couch. It's got to be on the page, and this way we can go back and we can reconstruct it. Now, here's the other thing that I tell people. No such thing as a perfect agreement. Every agreement is going to have areas of ambiguity, and you only see those things in retrospect when you go back in to try and gain clarity. But to try and just do it because you're friends or your family and you got good feelings and goodwill, that is oftentimes the ruination of so many relationships.
So many people start by asking the opinions of the people closest to them who have absolutely no authority to speak on any of those issues. And I think we do it because obviously we care about that person. And maybe to some extent they care back, but they give us the advice that they would follow, which is almost never the advice that we should follow if we have a question or an itch or burning desire for more. Go seek out that person. So where do you start to shift from these multiple things you've been doing since the age of 9 to earn a living, hustling? Yeah. You're hustling. You're finding different ways to make money. You learn a very expensive and valuable lesson in being screwed over by your married-in family, technically. Right? That's wasn't one of the Scheels. So,
but he's still, to be honest with you, today he's 85 years old. He is recovering from multiple ailments, cancer, stroke. He still lives in one of my homes.
Wow.
So we made up, he ended up going, he did end up going to jail for tax evasion. With his 6th grade education, he wrote his own appeal. He overturned the conviction, got his sentence commuted and got out. He was supposed to be away for 25 years. He got out, I think, after 4.
So this is a brilliant person. Who went down the wrong path.
Yep. And he recognizes it today. I have an asset that I got from him that he put into my charge, and we were literally strategizing on it right before I came over. It's a 48-mile natural gas and energy pipeline in the Utica Shale, holding tanks on deep water docks on the Great Lakes, thousands upon thousands of acres of mineral rights. And he lost everything when he went away, and the only thing they left behind was this because they were worried about the environmental concerns. So, this story has this huge bookend to it where it's like, in the beginning it was aspirational. I saw this man and what he did. And then as I started to become more and more aware, I didn't like the way he did it. And then we had this, let's say, inflection point where I became the focal point of his ire. And he took everything and he destroyed me. And then he went away. And when he came back into my life, I was kind of fearful. I'm like, boy, this guy is not a great guy to be at odds with. But when he showed up, I didn't avoid him, right? And we settled our differences. And out of the kindness and the forgiveness came this amazing asset that still requires, a fair amount of energy and effort in all candor to be able to maximize its value. but it was left behind for dead because of those environmental concerns. And then my experience with brownfields and other things allowed me to step in and say, look, I might be the one guy who can help you build this. And he turned it over to me in its entirety, right? So it's owned free and clear. It's all this other stuff. So, you can't give up on the story. You got to keep showing up. And I always say, do the next best right thing. If you can follow that principle in all of our things, like even today with us, we're both hectic. We're flying in. We tried to do one of these in Vegas. The intention has really always been for us to come together and see how we can help support one another and serve the audience and try and really add value. And we didn't give up. And here we are. I don't think you probably ever thought you'd be in Cleveland doing this when we first.
No, it definitely wasn't on the agenda. We talked about a couple of things, but even when you rolled in today, I was sitting here just shooting solo content. Yeah. Scott said he's going to be here. Obviously, I did a little silent Tiger Woods pump as I was getting on the plane this morning and got the confirmation. But we had faith. We booked the spot regardless. Yes. And even if you weren't able to make it, not for any reason other than you being pulled in different directions because of what you have going on.
That's right. You got several hundred people coming into Cleveland this weekend for Mastermind and, amazing content delivered by folks who are homegrown talent, right? And you see what they're able to accomplish. So I guess the lesson here and the reality is that story's not written until you stop writing. So keep writing.
And that's a beautiful story to bring things full circle. Someone who wronged you, and you were able to forgive them at some point. And I just had this conversation with someone very close to my heart, that forgiveness is not for them. It's for you.
Yes.
And whether or not he was able to articulate that with his 6th grade rough around the edges education, because he's got to be a bit of an assassin to do what he did.
Yeah.
I think his actions spoke volumes about bringing that relationship full circle and how much respect he has earned or learned to respect.
He's shared with me his regret. He said he always saw a promise and real spark and uniqueness in me. But he regretted the fact that he reacted the way that he did in that moment because it really was his doing. It was he was the catalyst for causing that business to collapse because it was primed for some great stuff.
But like Morpheus,
but in the moment, he needed his pound of flesh.
Morpheus in the Matrix, But what if that never happened?
Right?
Are we here?
No, we're not.
Are you still the Scott Scheel that we know?
Not at all. And in fact, that was the seminal moment in my professional career, which is why he's so much a part of that story. I was achieving a little bit of success, but I was so incredibly cocky. If you hadn't created millions and millions of dollars in your career by the time you were 24 years old, what do you have that I could possibly learn from was the attitude, right? You got to be doing better than me for me to step back and listen to you, which is ridiculous. Right. It's preposterous. Not everybody values the same things. So being humbled, being homeless, being broke, destroyed credit, no assets, no value, no love life. My girlfriend broke up with me. My dog goes into foster care. I move into my mother's basement. It probably gets worse, but for me, that was the bottom of the barrel. And none of that happens without him. And then I don't emerge with this new perspective on life that says it isn't over. You can rebuild this. And your story of how you've been able to resurrect your career is a story of redemption that I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to. Now, about 7-8 years later, I had created some success in real estate and commercial real estate. And when people wanted me to share my story, I kind of had to go back to this inflection point. And so almost everybody who's eventually come to know me has heard the story about how this all went down. And so as you talk about it, the challenges, the pitfalls, the failures, those are the things that actually help you form your character.
It's almost like you're getting it out of the way so that you can discover who you truly are.
Yep. No doubt.
Because you're doing the IDs. It doesn't feel right, but it's a means to an end. That's not you. The computers was hustling. It was doing well. Yeah. And you were obviously thinking unclearly to even go to somebody who would, sell you up the creek shortly.
And we just had no idea that was really his business model at the time. He just was, from outward perspective.
Okay, I got you.
He's a gentleman. He's successful. He was, very
you didn't
smooth.
Know how he made his money.
Right. You didn't know how he really did it. I came to find out later as I bumped into individual after individual after individual that had really kind of fallen prey to this sort of methodology.
I have a similar story, unfortunately. You just never know until you know.
Yeah.
And some people are very good at glossing over who they really are.
Yeah.
But, that body of work and your resume and making all the mistakes, and you start to get a little more clear on who's who, what's what. But then in time, and as they say in boxing, one of my few sports I follow, class tells over time.
For sure does.
And unless you're in a room, center stage, doing what you do over the course of decades, there's a feeling out process. Like, is this guy just here to take our money? And thankfully, that's not you. So real estate becomes the thing. And that's what you're known for. One deal, one time can change your life forever.
That's true.
That is the premise of Commercial Academy. Yeah. Tell us about your one deal, one time, and how it changed your life forever, because I want to share mine.
Yeah.
And then we'll go into exactly how, people at the beginning stages of their career can, capitalize on some of the things that you teach.
Thank you. Well, one deal, one time can change your life forever is our trademarked slogan. And I don't really know exactly how I happened onto that, but it was my actual personal experience. I was still in the computer industry. After that business failed, I found someone else who did what I knew how to do, and I went to work for them. And in relatively short order, I was able to ramp myself up back to a living wage. But because of my credit, because of my past obligations, and I didn't want to go bankrupt, I was still not making any money. So, I'm living in mom's basement still, got a job, trying to dig my way out. And I saw an infomercial on the television. A guy named Carlton Sheets back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Carlton was the original, you can do no down payment real estate. And he was talking about single family homes. But soon thereafter, I got involved in some groups, and I realized that apartment buildings, retail shopping centers, office buildings, medical office, land subdivision was going to be something that I would feel a little better about, that I could create bigger wins. Right. I started sharing that mantra with everybody, and a realtor that I knew, and this is crazy. I mean, I don't think I've ever told it this way. So the guy who got me in trouble, right, and went bad on me, who's living in my house today, I went out to find this apartment building, and it was his ex-wife. That was my realtor.
No way.
And I've never shared that story before, because I don't think I ever really even put it together until we were talking about it, because I don't usually get that deep into this part of my origin story. So his ex-wife, my aunt, my cousin's mother, my mother's sister's son, and I are sitting here, and I'm telling her I'm going to do real estate. She's like, you're not going to, you? Come on. Who's going to sell you real estate? I'm like, you'll see. I just read Carlton Sheets' course, man. I got this thing set up.
On top of the world.
Man, I know all about it. I know what a mortgage is, bro. Who you talking to? So anyway, I happen to find this building, and I'll take you back before the first deal. This is the first deal I really tried to do. It was a 9-unit motel. So it was just, 9 efficiencies. And in the front was a laundromat. And I put the offer together, and it was like $360,000. And I'm pretty excited about it. I'm thinking this could be really a good deal. So I put my offer out, and they love it. And the way I was going to make it work was I was going to renovate those efficiencies. I was going to make them a little nicer, raise the rents a couple bucks. But it was the front. It was this laundromat. I'm like, man, I'm going to take over the laundromat. I'm going to get all new equipment. There's thousands of apartments within real proximity to this. I'm going to kill it. They're paying me like $900 a month in rent, $800 a month in rent, something crazy, not too much money. And I'm doing the math on, how many people I see coming in there. The coin drop, something 5, 6, 7, 8 grand a month out of this laundromat. This is going to really work. So finally get ready to go to closing, and they come back to me, like, great news. We just renewed the laundromat for 10 years. Like, no, that's not what I want. They said, here's the better news. They're paying you $1,000 a month now. Gross. No electric, no water, no nothing. So here they are. They cut this great deal. Came to find out that it was the guy's brother-in-law that owned the laundromat. He cut him a sweetheart deal with me, this young patsy that they think they're going to get over on. And because they were not really supposed to renegotiate that lease, that was for me to do. And in all of our contracts now, we say you're not allowed to renegotiate this while we're in due diligence without our consent. They ended up cratering that deal, and I didn't do it. So I'm kicking around, and I find this 24-unit apartment building. And this is my one deal one time. So it's 24-unit apartment building, 100% occupied. The rents have not been raised in 5 years. So this is a pretty good opportunity, because in commercial real estate, when you look at how you value it, it's the income, not necessarily the comps that create the value. So if I can raise the income, then the value is going to go up and I'll make a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, which for me would have been many years of salary in one day. So I go through and I'm checking it all out. He's asking $900,000. I go home and I do the math like Carlton taught me, 24 single family homes. Even with that terrible underwriting, I knew it couldn't be worth more than $800 or $800,000.
Right.
And he's asking for $900. Now I don't have $800 or $900. I don't have $9,000 personally. But what I learned was that the revenue from the rent roll, net income after you pay all the expenses, that's enough to help you raise the money. And the asset itself can usually bring somewhere between 50 on a non-stabilized property and as much as 90% of what's needed to buy it, just because the asset's performing. Now, 100% occupied, this one was going to carry about 80%. And here's the best part. He was willing to seller finance the deal. So as a seller finance deal, that solved so many problems for me. I wasn't going to be able to go to the bank with my credit score.
Right.
I didn't have any experience as a sponsor, and I didn't have any cash. So those are three real barriers to entry that, folks think are going to stop them. So I went and I wrote the offer after doing the math. I said, look, I'm just going to overpay for it. My strategy is I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. He wants $900,000. I'm going to give him $900,000 on his terms, 20% down. Where am I going to get $183,600? I have no idea, but I'm going to figure it out. Right. So I send the offer over to my aunt, who was the realtor, who was married to, Uncle Gary, right? This crazy little dichotomy. She calls me up 2 hours later. I'm like, wow, that worked really quick. This is phenomenal. She's like, Scott, I got bad news.
She thinks I'm a genius. Nope.
Bad. Yeah, no, she didn't like it at all. She's like, Scott, I'm not even going to waste my time submitting this offer. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's full price offer. She goes, yeah, but Scott, there's other offers coming in. There's going to be a multiple offer scenario, and you don't have any experience. I'm like, so? She said, well, these people have all the experience that they're well known in the marketplace. People really respect them. Like, what do you mean? They don't respect me? She's like, well, they don't know you, Scott. So, you don't really have a track record. I said, well, but I've offered full price. There's no way they're coming in at full price. It's not worth that much. She said, yeah, but Scott, they don't even need the seller's financing. You need the seller's financing or this thing's not going to work for you. So I hung up the phone. I was all pissed. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I knew this crap wouldn't work. Patsy buying something off the television thinking I'm going to get wealthy,
right.
And so I just kind of shut down and I was ready to quit. And I thought to myself, if you quit now, you don't deserve it. So I went back in and I did even more math, and I was able to determine in no uncertain terms that I could afford to pay him even 2% more than his full ask. So I wrote him an offer for $918,000 with 20% down. I knocked on every door that I could. I raised all the money because I was able to demonstrate that I could give him an annual 10% return with monthly cash flow if I was able to buy the property at that price, and I'd still have a $6,000 a month positive cash flow for myself. So when I put that together, I submitted the offer to him and he accepted it because no one else was offering that much. And the way that he looked at it was that if I had messed up, he'd still have my $184,000. He'd still have my $183,600. He'd still have my $184,000, and he'd get his asset back. And it's an asset that he'd already owned for 20 years, so he couldn't have been more comfortable with it. And we put in two other components because I thought I was being ultra creative. The first one was that he had a management test. So if at any point in time this 100% occupied building ever fell below 80% occupancy, I was in default. If I couldn't cure it in 30 days, he got it back anyway. And I gave him another one, which was a key man insurance. And I was so young that term life insurance for me at the age of 26 or 27 years old was free.
Right.
So I got him a $1 million term life policy, which was paid for by the property. And now he had all the security in the world, right? And right away, I got in, rolled up my sleeves. We cleaned up the common areas, new carpet, got rid of the smell, brighter light fixtures, added some security cameras, which are all hardwired at the time. Cleaned up the parking lot, crack fill, stripe, seal coat, new landscaping. And then I went and started knocking on all the doors, and I told people as their leases came due, I wanted them to stay, but I had to renovate their units, because if I didn't renovate their units, I couldn't justify the rent increase.
Right.
And I mentioned that the rents hadn't been increased in over 5 years. So I wanted all 5 years in one fell swoop, which isn't always easy to get, because a nuisance raise 15, 20, 25, 30 bucks, maybe even 50 bucks you'll get away with. Right. Hundreds of dollars in this environment, people aren't paying $600-700 a month. There's no way. And I was able to pull that off using some creative strategies. And in just a very short period of time, it went from being worth about $900,000 to about $1.3 million. And I was able to pull out a couple $100,000 cash by design. But when I went to go to the closing, I called him up and I said, listen, I'm getting ready to pay you off. And he had gotten comfortable. It had been about 18 months. He got real comfortable with that cash flow. His wife had allocated it to the grandkids. Mm-hmm. You know, he was happy with it, and he didn't want to get paid off because he was going to have a huge tax burden, because he'd owned the building now for, 25, 30 years. He had no basis left, which means he's going to pay big capital gains. He said, Scott, is there something we could work out? I said, well, I'll continue to pay you, but I can't let you have a first position mortgage on this property. If you'll allow me to substitute the collateral, and by the way, I don't have another building right now. I have to buy the building to give you the other collateral. If you'll let me do that, then I'll keep the loan and I'll keep paying you. He was able to see that I had done a great job with that building, that I was honorable. In fact, I showed up on the 1st of every month. Well, actually, it was the 10th of every month, because he gave me time to collect the rents. And I would hand carry the payment to his house. And I did that really for about the first 10 years that he was a private lender of mine.
Wow.
Because it kept me humble. Reminded me of what it was like in the beginning when nobody had a real reason to bet on me, but he did. And so instead of pulling out about $200,000, I pulled out $848,383.14 cash, tax-free, within 18 months of my very first deal that I ever bought. No money down, paid off all of my investors with their returns, owned the property, and was off to the races, so well capitalized that within the next 12 months, I picked up like another 150,000 square feet of real estate, and I never looked back, and I never went back to work. And it was truly that one deal, one time that changed everything. And I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any books I could read. I had this residential deal, and I just kept showing up and tried to do the next best right thing. And in the end, God rewarded me. And I don't know how to say it other than the fact that that man today is 97 years old. He is aware of all of the lives that have been changed because he took a chance on that humble young kid who was trying to figure it out, that had really no compelling reason for him to bet on me. And it's one of the things he's most proud of, that he was able to seed that and how many lives it's changed. So It's pretty cool.
It's a beautiful story, because there's a point there where he gets comfortable and you don't, well, that's not the deal we had, and you could turn on him. For sure.
But you don't.
And you still keep him around.
And it's cool because he wanted me to shorten his amortization table. That was the one change. It was on a 30-year am. He's like, well, can you pay me off over 15 years? And so my payment went from $5,909.15 to about $7,800 a month.
Right.
And how many people listening to this podcast right now would pay $7,800 a month to have $850,000 cash they could do whatever they want with? And if you're responsible and you're not blowing it on, lifestyle, entertainment, and chasing women, right? You can do some really good stuff with that kind of money. Way better than $7,000 a month. $7,000 a month doesn't go very far. Right. But $800,000, you can do incredible things with chunks of capital. And people just don't understand that.
And that's what you teach at Commercial Academy. So my story, I was a successful entrepreneur. I had the best year I ever had. I run into Andrew at an airport. I've told the story, I think, to you and also to the audience, so I'll skip over it. But
I don't know.
So we're on our way to a Tony Robbins seminar.
Yeah.
And it's in Sun Valley, Idaho, at Tony's house. And It's my first platinum event, or better yet, second event in platinum year with Tony, and it's Andrew's last.
Okay.
And we meet at Chicago O'Hare 5 minutes before the airplane is about to board. It's canceled for weather. And a gentleman, Daniel Perez, who we just saw in Boston a couple weeks ago, just said, hey, this is my boy Andrew, this is my boy Sean. And we're walking to the line. Everybody's doing the amazing race because, you know, the Tony community, we can't miss a day. It's FOMO, so they're going to drive here and then fly out of here and drive 7 hours and get there at 3 in the morning. And we're just like, chill. We're like, we're in Chicago. What can we do? Andrew's like, you guys can hang out with me. I live right downtown. Next thing I know, I'm on the 69th floor, overlooking the Chicago River and the lake. I'm like, well, this is a heck of a way to fail forward. And it speaks to being in rooms.
Yeah.
Like Tony's and like yours and the amazing people you meet. Daniel, who happens to say, oh, I've got a friend who lives in the building and he's looking for Wi-Fi, for Andrew's password, Wi-Fi rather. And Imran's name pops up.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Because Imran's a floor below and a floor over in the same building, had never met. Daniel's the connector. We're at lunch doing lunch an hour later at Terrace 16 in the Trump. And this is the audience. And it's just crazy how things happen. We end up going out the next day. The flight goes from 9 in the morning, gets rescheduled all day. So we're just circling Chicago O'Hare. Yeah. We eat at this crappy Italian restaurant twice, and on the paper napkin tablecloth is where Andrew starts to tell us about triple net lease and what he does. And I'm fascinated, but I'm not in the real estate space. I do durable medical equipment, but I do incredibly well, although I've got a partner in the IRS that takes 40% on the dollar and does absolutely nothing for it. Yeah. Well, that's debatable, but that's for another conversation. We have dinner, lunch all week at this beautiful restaurant at the resort because the food there is terrible. Plus, you're on Tony time at 2 in the morning. We're like, screw that. We're hungry. Let's go eat. Two big boys. And we get to know each other. Still, do not pursue the commercial real estate. Until one of the characters that was at that stay over that night, he goes, hey, I'd like to go back to a phone call about triple net lease. I want to hear more. And I'm like, hey, I want to be on that phone call. It wasn't even my initiation. And I'm just listening, and I had the best year of my life financially. And I'm like, they're going to take 40% unless I do something about it. And that was the catalyst for me taking a bet on myself first and foremost, and on my now partner, Andrew. Yeah. And funny story, I had made some of those same handshake agreement mistakes in the past and lost myself hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I wasn't about to put millions at risk. So I asked my wife to come out to dinner when he came to New York and give him the sniff test. And like, is this guy all right? And this is also something you learn from wisdom. Right. Trust the female intuition.
100%.
Because we see the things we want to see.
Yeah.
And they are skeptical by nature. Yeah. And I've now since learned to incorporate her into any big decisions because I learned a very valuable lesson. And we can have a debate about it, but it's not done without her consent because it's our future. So we go in, and to your point of your aunt at the time, kind of, oh, you can't do this. Yeah. My attorney, who's also in the commercial real estate space and looks out for me, but doesn't necessarily have the same recklessness, and I say that air quotes, tolerance for risk is a more,
sure, that's a great way to say it.
Risk, I'm all about it because I haven't gotten to the place, and that's what's gotten me here. So what's the worst that could happen? We lose it all, we'll build it again.
Right.
I'm about to cut this very big check, and she goes, are you sure about this? Yeah. And I asked her, I said, is all the paperwork straight? She goes, yeah. Am I protected? Yeah. I said, I told you when we started, you cover my ass and you let me take the risk. And she laughed, and I wrote a very big check, but she gave me one more out, and I'm so glad I didn't take it. Yeah. And I'm so glad you didn't take it, because if you listen to people around you that haven't, and she's done well, but she's not going the route that I'm going, nor does she want to. That's not her story. It's not her calling. So I didn't listen, and it has been the best thing ever because one deal, one time has changed my life. But I tell that story to say that I got in your room, maybe uniquely, more so as an investor. I see people that are investors that come into the room. Yeah. But then what blew my mind was this whole creative aspect. Before going into your room, I knew nothing about that. Yeah. You see these malls in your neighborhood, and you have no idea how that works. Yeah. And I was fascinated from the jump. And I always say, with the exception of Tony's program and now Zenith Commercial Academy, are the sure bets in my life that I'm not putting away. And then also I've told Josh and I've told you, and it's not blowing smoke, you offer the best bang for your buck of any mastermind we've been to because of the level of information and knowledge, and then the community you've created It's full of solid people.
That's the whole point for me, was to try and replicate myself. I want to change the lives of people that I'm never going to have the opportunity to meet. And the only way that you can do that is by leading from the front with an example that hopefully shines with integrity, that is compassionate, empathetic. I've got people who say, Scott, how can you give that presentation again after 23 years? That's kind of the Wayne Newton philosophy. It's like for them, it's the first time they're hearing it.
Right.
I've got to be as passionate. I've got to be as motivating. I've got to be as inspirational. I've got to be as confidence building as I can possibly be, because this is my one chance to leave an impression and to leave a seed. It's not about sales, like you said. It isn't about that at all. In fact, you can't find me giving a sales pitch today. I just won't do it. Right. There's other people who speak on my behalf, talk about what I've done in their lives. And if you want to sign up and it makes sense for you, that's awesome. But the point of it is that you want people who want you. You want people who believe in themselves. We're there to pick them up and to make those things happen. And in the end, when we are out there trying to, let's say, inspire people to move, it really has been about letting the results speak for themselves. And so everybody wants the quick fix. Everybody wants to lose 100 pounds in a week, right? You didn't get to be 100 pounds overweight, in a week. I can't take it off in a week. But what I can do is I can teach you how to compress time. And in commercial real estate, we tell people you can accomplish what it takes most people 1 to 2 decades to create. We can do that for you in 6 to 24 months of focused effort. Now, some people need 2 years of education before they're ready to dig in for 6 to 24 months. Some people want to be adjacent to it and they never really want to be the lead principal. They'd rather bet the quarterback on other deals and fractionalize their investment, diversify their risk, and not necessarily be the ones that have to show up every day. Kind of taking that limited partner investment role. Right. Other people, they want to do every last thing. And they don't need to have all of the answers before they embark on the journey. Some people, they need to know every twist, every turn. They need to know all the terminology. They want all the relationships. And it takes a little longer, but the key is the investment vehicle is what's unique. It's bulletproof from the perspective of nothing else offers you the opportunity to get your arms around assets that are worth millions of dollars for less upfront investment. And in addition to that leverage that you're able to use, which so many people overlook the concept of leverage in real estate because it's a fixed asset and you can't really move it.
Right.
It's insurable. We can, go paint your stock certificate. Let me know if that made it worth more, right? But we can make improvements to it. We can do it ourselves. We can use other people's talents. But realistically, it's that lease agreement. And if you can write a better lease, man, you can change the world. And so we give people those better leases. We show them how to make that happen. And not only is it just one deal one time, but literally one signature one time can make you a millionaire in commercial real estate. And so when people start to learn that and they start to see how a $10 or a $20 rent increase across 20 apartments is $500,000 year one, they're awakened to the idea that they might have to spend, look, they're a 6-figure earner, they're going to spend 5 years getting there. Or if they're $250,000, it's still 2 years gross to get there.
And that's you showing up every day and punching the clock.
And dealing with a lot of people's manipulation and, their own personal agendas. I can tell you if you're working for someone else, for the most part, you're working at a discount. Your results have got to be producing so much better outcome than what you're actually able to benefit from, that you got to get that side hustle working sooner. And it's the perfect side hustle because commercial real estate kind of moves at a glacial pace. So if you're at work and you're gone for a couple of days, not much is really likely going to change. It's a slow moving industry. And while many people might get frustrated by that, I've found it to be a saving grace. Because you get time to contemplate, you get time to research, you get time to think it through. Look, we need an answer tonight, or else we got someone else who's coming and taking the deal. That's not it.
You get time to grow into it.
Yeah.
Because these assets, they're not sexy, but they are stable.
Yeah.
And they will change your life if you look 10 years ahead.
Well, and you can do things, we can show people how to do things with just vacant parcels and dead buildings. I mean, you can look at it and say, look, there's no way that the seller could expect anything out of this other than a contract to pay them down the road if we turn it around.
Right.
Now, that isn't evident in a lot of other places. And so from the perspective of being able to just kind of roll up your sleeves and get involved and take action on an immediate basis, I haven't found anything better. The tax shelters, like you spoke about, are unprecedented. There really isn't anything else that does it. The hedge against inflation is unbelievable, meaning it doesn't matter if the economy is subject to inflation. That means it is forcing the value of your building higher. Yeah. Labor costs are up, raw materials are up, utilities are up. If you've got something there, it means there's not a lot of new product coming in, and it's just making your building, again, worth more. So the time value of money in this instance means that the longer you can afford to hold it, even if you don't do much with it, you're just going to create that value delta if you bought it right in the first place. Right. And if you bought it wrong in the first place, there might not be anything anybody can do to help you. You may just have to suffer that loss. So my ultimate goal is to prevent people from screwing up their first deal.
And you have a room full of people that are willing to help.
Yeah.
There's an unwritten honesty component. Yeah. That is shared across the room, which is if you fuck around, you'll find out.
Yeah. And you'll be out.
And
right?
you'll be out of the group.
And
so no dishonest behavior, no stealing deals, no flim-flamming, no behind the scenes, legwork to get a deal taken from someone or
for sure.
painted as a bad deal. There's so many people there with skilled eyes that are going to help you and want to genuinely see you win because someone else lifted them up. And then there's another component to the room that I want to praise you for, which is the diversity.
Thank you.
Rarely, if ever, I'm going to say never, have I been into a room as diverse as Commercial Academies.
Thank you.
You once did hey, has anybody been born outside of the United States assignment? And you didn't even know the outcome.
Yes, sir.
But more than half the room raised their hands.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why is it that immigrants can come here and see the pot of gold for what it is? And those of us who are born here, like myself, struggle for a while to see it for what it was.
I will put it into one main, let's say, characteristic. Around the world, land ownership for 1,000 years has been the differentiator between a substantial individual and somebody who is ruled by others. And in fact, you'll oftentimes hear, well, women didn't have the right to vote until 1920. You've heard that, right?
Of course.
Big deal. I think it was either the 19th or the 20th Amendment. I apologize for not knowing that.
Right.
What they don't know is only 8 years earlier that men got the right to vote. How'd that happen? Well, the reason that happened was because just by the virtue of being an individual, you didn't have the right to vote. You had to own land. You had to be a stakeholder for you to have a vote. That's like saying, well, I've got a company and I've got 20 partners, but we're going to let everybody comment on how we run the business. You'd never do that. So you had to be a landowner in order to be somebody recognized by the government as having the understanding to have influence on policy. And it's always been that way. So when I meet folks that come from overseas, whether it's from Latin America, whether it's from Africa, whether it's from, Europe, whether it's from India, they're coming from cultures where there was no chance for them to own land.
Right.
But when they come here and they start to realize that it is truly open to everybody, you can't prevent them from going after it. If you can give them the confidence, the support, the insight, the inspiration, the relationships, they just go wild. And when they report back to folks that they left behind, they can't believe the opportunity that is available to us. And then when you start to understand the way that the United States, let's say, distributes credit, there's no place in the world that distributes credit like this. So you can come here just with the ambition, you can acquire land ownership rights, you can leverage that land or that building with credit. It means you've taken what most countries require half a dozen generations to accomplish. Try and buy a building in London.
Right.
Try and buy a building in Tokyo. It's a 100-year mortgage, right? Go ahead and try and buy land in the Middle East. You forget it, right? Those things are tightly controlled and tightly regulated. It isn't really an open environment and an open society. So it's one of the reasons why, America's got plenty of problems. We've got problems with leadership. We got problems with debt. We got problems with crime. We've got problems with, culture wars, you name it. And by the way, I want to get on this one little thing. I know this has nothing to do with our topic, but I was thinking about it before we came together because I knew we'd talk today. When I was born, America was burning down.
Yeah.
Race riots. We had assassinations of presidential candidate, Martin Luther King, all within a very short window of time. Race riots everywhere. Mm-hmm. We were, maybe the epitome of environmental irresponsibility, right? The river here in Cleveland, water caught fire because it was so polluted, right? Because all of the manufacturing facilities for the automotive industry, they just pure sludge right into the watershed. And we were dealing with instability in the Middle East, right? Rationing of gas.
Yeah.
Energy was scarce. Interest rates were 20%. We were coming apart at the seams. We were in an endless war in Vietnam. We had 400 hostages taken by the Iranian regime that had just recently come into power. And our debt was out of control by standards at those days. So it's always coming apart at the seams, right? And today you sit back and you say, well, we've got diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some people like it and some people hate it. Well, there's good parts of it and there's bad parts of it.
Obviously, yeah.
And, the blinders have been taken off and the windows have been open with respect to, media is really controlled. And that's not necessarily an unbiased narrative. Well, growing up, I always thought, well, Walter Cronkite, he's feeding me the truth.
Right.
I had no idea.
Right.
So you talk about these things, and I want you to know that the opportunity to live a life of your dreams, it always exists if you can tune out the noise.
Oh, yeah.
And so, as we've continued to inspire people from other countries around the world, and you've talked to these folks, they don't even speak a quality version of broken English, right? It's bad. And yet they're out there figuring it out.
Math is the universal language.
That's it, right? And they get to the bottom line. And for the most part, you're going to be represented by people who can smooth over all your rough spots.
Yep.
And so, and they get paid a percentage of the deal. And for the most part, they get paid by the seller, not even you. Right. So why wouldn't you utilize them to be able to shore up any areas of weakness in your own life? And so because we built this construct and we've built this system and we've built this network of individuals and resources and tools and relationships and professionals, finance, people come into our environment and I think they have a hard time believing that it's real because it's pretty complete.
Yeah. And you have a room full of people willing to do the bird dogging and the legwork.
Yes.
And then you have a room full of people that are willing to fund those deals. And then you have other people that are looking to add to portfolios or release some of their properties.
Yeah.
And because it's being done in the room, do it fairly and equitably so that they win and you win. And should you have any issues or hiccups in your first year, we've seen this. I'll give Nikita a shout out. I don't remember the gentleman he helped, but the gentleman, something with the deal went awry, one of the tenants, and Nikita stepped in and floated it because that's just the environment that you lead with. And in turn, I don't want to use the armies, but the generals lead with because there are people that you've mentored who lead with the same heart.
And that's the key.
It's pretty damn unique. Thank you.
It's humbling, it's flattering, it's aspirational, and it's fulfilling. And now we're in the process of trying to figure out, well, Scott's getting older. Feel great, but all of us are day to day.
Right.
And I want this thing to live on for generations. And so I'm in the process now of working with people to be able to territorialize what we do. Because, you being up in New York, you're going to have different insights about your neighborhoods, about
market.
What investment makes sense, about, how you can really add value, what makes sense, what are real timelines, that people who understand real estate really well still can't gain those insights. Right. And so we focus on collaboration and partnership. And what I tell a lot of folks who are just getting started, there's really no reason for you to be the 100% owner, operator, and executor on your own deal. What you should do is you should find other ways to get other people interested in what you're doing. But the good news is, even through COVID and all the other things that we went through, we meet every quarter. And if you keep showing up when you're in the room, you see it, you hear the stories, you see people, you see the evolution of deals, you see transactions that sometimes they take, 6 weeks, sometimes they take 6 months, sometimes they take 6 years, on big lifts. I mean, I'm in the middle of a deal right now. I've been in it 8 years. We bought it really cheap out of receivership. It was, it was dying. It was defaulted. And, we bought it for about $4.8 million. And I'm negotiating right now. We've split it up in about eight different parcels. Chipotle, Sheetz, Starbucks, AutoZone, Burlington, Five Below, Grocery Outlet, and many others that were working on it. And today it's going to be worth more than it was worth before it even went into receivership. It's going to be worth $50, $60, $70 million. You don't want everybody to ever think that they can turn that around in a week. We worked hard at that. But if you want a quick deal, we find parcels on good roads that are vacant, not being utilized at all. Cut a deal on it and find a user on a single tenant net lease deal. And we turn these things into hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in annual rents, which capitalizes out to a couple $1 million. And in many instances, it's a different lease negotiation. You have no burden of responsibility. You don't have to build it. You don't have to manage it. Right. You don't have to operate it. It's mailbox money. And it'll be there for 10, 15, some cases 20, 25, 30, 40 years. And those are things that change people's lives because in the end, it isn't the building, it's the income stream that you're trying to build. Right. And if you build a good income stream, whether it's in New York where you can maybe get a 4 or 5 cap, which is, the investor will pay you for 4% annual return because they know they're going to hold it for 2 generations, or whether you're in Oklahoma City where, maybe it's a 10 cap. Right. And if it's throwing off $100,000 a year in net income, that's worth $1 million, you can change people's lives because it costs a lot more to live in New York City than it does in Oklahoma City. Right. And so we try and get people focused on, where they can do it, how they want to do it, what their available time is, what their risk tolerance is, if they've got any sort of network at all, or if they're going to need us to help them build that network. We usually are able to help people do that in under 6 months.
Let's talk about the audience member who thinks this is all great, but still doesn't see a way in for them.
Yeah.
But they've got hunger.
Yeah.
And they've got desire.
Yeah.
And that being the key ingredient. What can they do in a room like Commercial Academies to add value to the room and in therein create some sort of check, some sort of momentum toward the levels that we're talking about?
Well, there's so many different ways to do it. Let's just touch on a couple of them.
Sure.
First one is, as you had alluded to earlier, you can get good at finding opportunities. If you get good at finding opportunities, and remember, there are so many asset classes in commercial real estate: multifamily, retail, office, industrial, logistics, recreational, land, agricultural. You can get into large-scale retail, shopping malls, which right now are in there. There's a ton of opportunity, but there's a ton of risk, right? Yep. So be careful.
We're moving on.
Getting in cheap isn't really always the key. You can get it for free and still lose, right? Because the overhead and the cost of turning it around. But if you can get good at finding assets that make sense, and we give people the tools to do that. We have our Opportunity Evaluator software in the Commercial Hub. So you get education, you get to learn how to do these things by watching the videos and taking the action steps that we lay out for you at each section and in each chapter. We have our 90-day action plan that shows you exactly how to get up to making your first offer in 90 days. We show you how to manage those properties and how to do them. But if you're risk adverse, or if you don't have the resources, or you don't have the time, or you don't have the money, we have people every single event that are trading deals, and you get a piece of equity and maybe you get a finder's fee. Or maybe you do a wraparound mortgage and you get paid to be kind of a sandwich lease sort of guy. The idea of being able to bring value to other people is something that the network has really been built around over the last 3 or 4 years. How do I bring people together to collaborate on deals? And what I find is that there are 2 big camps. There are people who have a lot of money and not a lot of time, and there are people who have a lot of time and not a lot of money. So if you've got a lot of time, the better off you can be at figuring out what others want in their partnership. Those deals happen literally every quarter. If you're somebody who's got a lot of money, but you don't have time to find the deals, you're always looking for that hungry, talented broker, investor, house flipper who's trying to make that transition. and how you can back them and you can empower them with the right documentation, the right legal agreements that make sure that the reporting comes through and that you actually have a say in where that money is spent. And so those are two great ways to do it. The third way to do it that I really like is you can get really good at options. So options say, look, you've got a property, it's not performing probably. It's either losing money, but it's got tenants, or it's completely vacant and it's got a lot of deferred maintenance usually. And what you do is you step in and you say, look, I want 60 to 90 days of due diligence. One of the major watersheds between commercial real estate and residential real estate is that if you've ever bought a residential home, you know everything about it before you write the offer. You know, obviously where it's located, you know what it's worth, you've done the comps, you know what sort of work needs to be done to it to bring it up to market standards. And you know that once you do that, you're pretty well able to determine what it's going to be worth. In commercial real estate, you make your offer before you know any of that information. You get a basic package of information. It's completely unvetted. You have no understanding as to who put it together, what manipulations are in there, what omissions are there that are going to trip you up. And so you get it under contract with what's called a letter of intent. And then you've got 30, 45, 60, 90, 180, sometimes years of time to do your due diligence. So with an option, what we do is we usually get that option for a period of time that allows us to control it so we can really figure out what we can do with it. And then we bring it either to the marketplace or we bring it to other investors and we say, look, this is what can be done with it. We've got the option on it. With that option, it gives you a window of control without any money at risk. Right. And that's what so many people are looking for when they get started. Because even if they've got money, a confused mind says no.
Yeah, absolutely. You clear up a lot of the confusion. So anybody who's got questions, who's hearing any of this and still doesn't really see themselves in that position, I implore you to just dig a little deeper. Scott has all the tools for, the fifth grader all the way up to people like himself who can do deals like this and have been doing deals like this for quite some time. What do you see right now in the commercial real estate space with all the moving parts?
Yeah.
And why is this such a great time?
Well, capitalism cleanses itself, and I'm a proud capitalist. A lot of people don't like capitalism. What we see in different administrations and in different economic philosophies is the privatization of profits, right? So big companies making big money, and the socialization of losses, right? So too big to fail. Everybody's got to chip in to save them, but they made all the money, right?
But they didn't have it to bail themselves out.
Right. So that falls on the taxpayer, right? That falls on the government. And some of those things worked out, and there's some success stories in there. But for the most part, when they're making gross profits, right? When the airlines got bailed out and now they come back and they say, we need to charge you an extra $200 per bag, right? Well, you're just fleecing us. Right. That's not how it works in other nations, right? So we come back to the concept that says right now is a wonderful time because the banks have to deal with their bad assets on their balance sheet, and they are not asset managers. So there are so many deals right now that are coming back to the marketplace. You're going to see your auction houses fill up. You're going to see your brokers with deals that, look, it's please make an offer, under any terms, under any circumstances, pennies on the dollar.
Take this off our hands.
Right. And so as that happens, what it does is it destabilizes values in the market. So unless you're dealing with something that's absolutely stabilized, 85% or greater occupancy with quality credit tenants and good historical operating statements, everything that's gone on during COVID, especially in the central business district, there's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of losses that are going to finally find their way to the bottom line of these institutions. And that's going to tie up capital. So when they don't have the money to lend because they got to deal with the bad assets, and that does tie up because of banking regulations, right now they're able to lend about 98% of deposits, right? So if you give them $1, right, that they can lend $100 on $1. Well, really, they can lend $100 on $2, right? So their leverage is astronomical. When those deals go bad, it's impossible to turn them around. So they're going to have to stop lending for a while, which is what's really happening. Loans are tougher, they're more expensive, underwriting's tougher, LTVs are tougher, but in the end, they just don't want to make the loans. They want to take deposits because they need cash on balance sheet to save themselves. But that's not going to happen. So when these types of corrections come in the marketplace, and they're huge, especially in multifamily, so many people got into the multifamily space, 3 cap, 4 cap on actuals, thinking, well, look, I'm going to just be able to clean it up, put lipstick on the pig. I'm going to raise rents. I'm going to take short-term, lower interest debt, 3% interest debt. And then when I finally fill it up, I'll be able to get permanent debt at 3%. And I'm going to make all this money. Well, that didn't happen because interest rates doubled and cap rates expanded by more than double. So you went from a 4 cap to a 7 or an 8 cap. Well, if you just did the basic math on that, there is no way out. It's just a matter of time before those things start to come down. And so many of those were funded with agency debt, HUD-backed debt, Fannie Mae-backed debt. Well, I'm just telling you, government, they'll take those losses. Right. Banks, they'll take those losses. Owners are going to have to walk away from their equity in their investments. And while a lot of people think that that's preying on misery, it's not. It's capitalism cleanses itself. If you can't compete and you can't perform and you can't offer a good product to the marketplace, no one's going to rent from you. Right. Okay, well, that's where we're at right now. So I am encouraging people right now to break in with creative finance, seller financing, wraparound mortgages, subject to existing debt. If they're able to go ahead and find subdivision strategies, master lease options. Those are great strategies for people to get involved with very little money to see if their inclination is right that they can get in, clean it up, and turn it around. And you don't want to try and take something that's too large, right? Remember that first deal was 24-unit building. That was big for me, right? It was a really big deal, but it wasn't big. Right. But what it did was it allowed me to that scale of economy that said, when I raise my rent $25 a month, I'm going to get $600 a month in extra rent. All right, that's pretty good. $600 times 12. That's an extra $7,200 a year. At a 5 cap, a $25 rent increase on those 24 units ended up adding about $1.4 million in value to the asset. Well, most people don't see how that works. And it's a very straightforward approach. And because so many assets are in trouble right now it's a numbers game. Now it's just a cookbook. If you can make 100 phone calls and you can make 10 offers, you'll find one deal that will accept 100% your terms, your ask in your market with the upside that you want on a probably, when you're done with it, pride of ownership asset that you're going to be able to hang on to for quite some time. And so build that portfolio when times are and values are down. Right. The mantra has always been buy low, sell high. Well, how do you do that when prices are astronomical? And so for the last, I guess in the last cycle, we didn't do a ton of acquisition. We did a lot of eat what's on your plate. Let's capitalize and maximize the value. And we did a lot of building. We did a lot of construction, right? And that's not something that I guess folks who are new to the game can really do or feel confident doing. So this is the best time to break in because people are in trouble. Values are speculative. It's not what it's worth today. It's what you can do with it. So we always look at that force appreciation. And I'll tell you, in my entire career, there's never been a better time when values are less certain, financing is harder to get, and people are more willing to be flexible than right now.
We have the room in Commercial Academy. We have the vehicle. We know it's real estate. But mindset being the king of all of those. Yeah. We've seen people have analysis paralysis, work the room for years and never make a deal. What is the one thing, as we wrap up, that you would like to tell our audience, or one thing they can do to give them that mindset shift? We know what yours was. It was that chip. It was that desire to not be broke. It was that, desire to have a better life. What can someone reach to? What are the simple things that you can share with them that can start them onto shifting that mindset and having the courage to do the thing that they know is the vehicle, real estate. Yeah. But the obstacle is your belief that you're not good enough or you don't have the means.
Yeah. So I'll try and offer up a handful of ideologies that can empower. The first one is a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And no matter who I've ever talked to, the only regret once they've got involved and been successful in commercial real estate was that they did not start sooner. It's like, man, I wish I would have known about this 10 years ago. I wish you would have known about it 10 years ago too. Would have helped. you'd be capitalizing on some of those investments today. The second thing is that there's literally zero chance that you're not going to make a mistake, but we're going to prevent you from making the big ones. So the idea is you've got to get yourself surrounded by individuals who are authentically willing to share and roll up their sleeves and give you good advice, A, without necessarily being paid for it, because that's what you get in our network, and B, from a position of actual experience. They were there. They didn't just read about it. It's not just philosophy. They didn't take a class in college. They were actually in the streets. They rolled up their sleeves and they did it. The third one that I'll tell you is that while you're going to make mistakes and while it's important for you to get started, the big shift that I think most people see is that when you're evaluating a property, when you're, getting out there and doing it, they don't know the first thing about how to break it down. So just do as you're told in the beginning. Just don't try and rework the deal. The letter's good enough. Send it. Just get it out in the mail. If somebody calls you and you don't have all the answers, don't lie. Stop trying to pretend that you know something you don't know. Right? If you don't have the answer, people are disarmed by your willingness to be vulnerable. The next thing is that you can shore up any of your frailties by just reaching out and finding a partner. And if you have the right deal, you're going to find that partner. The next thing, never think with your wallet. Your wallet's always short. You're always not going to have enough. Right. You're always going to have another home for those dollars. You got to remind yourself that the deal is what brings the value, not necessarily the cash you can bring. Cash is a commodity. It's literally everywhere, right? If it's not Sean that can put the money up, it's Andrew that can put up the money. If it's not Andrew, it's Josh. If it's not Josh, it's Scott. If it's not those four guys, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of other people out there who are seeking a good investment. The next thing that I'll tell you that I guess circles back to it is the idea that when you're interested in doing a deal, you've got to be authentic. You can't sit back and, let's say, bullshit somebody into investing with you or believing in you. And in the end, it doesn't have to be the only thing that you're doing. So many people say, well, Scott, boy, I love your event. I loved your course. This is what I'm doing. I'm going home Monday and I'm quitting my job. And I'm burning the bridges, and I'm, burning the boats at the shoreline and I'm just committed. And I'm like, no. You didn't hear a single thing I said. Only when your portfolio is strong enough to support your needs, your lifestyle, can you then quit your day-to-day hustle that's getting you your revenue. So many people want to stop. This is something you can do part-time. And people forget that. Now, it might take a little longer if you can only do 2 hours a week. Right. It'll take a little longer, but you'll get there. Right. If you can do, what I tell people is you can do about 5 to 10 hours a week. 6 months is a real timeline. If you can't do that much, then just add to that. Right. But in the end, getting started, figuring out what kind of asset you want, and be specific, right? Because so many are like, well, I'm just going to leave my mind open, and anything that comes down the pike, I'm going to take a look at. Now your education takes you decades. Right. Whereas if you stick in a single market, or maybe two markets, and you stick into a single or two asset classes, now, if you're evaluating 10, 15, 20 deals a month, you get oriented really quickly. Right. You start to become an expert in your field, in your marketplace. And that's something that so few people actually invest in. They want to be a jack of all trades. They want to figure out every type of asset class. I did a little bit of that, and it, I think, inhibited my growth. It absolutely expanded my strike zone. But in the end, I would have been a lot further, a lot faster had I kind of stuck per asset class. But because I had the blessing and the gateway to become an educator and a mentor to people, that diversity served me. So if you want to be a mentor and you want to learn the hard way and you want to try and, do the new thing on every other deal, that's great. But my encouragement would be to stay in your lane for a little while, get started as soon as you can, rely on other people, ask questions, be authentic, show your vulnerabilities, maybe not necessarily to the seller, but even to the seller. When I shared my vulnerabilities about who I was and who I wasn't, that gave them the confidence to bet on me. And then last but certainly not least, you can do this part-time, and part-time still one deal, one time will change your life forever.
Amen. Scott, I want to thank you for coming out and giving us your time and so much of your wisdom today. I also want to just have our audience learn where they can find out more about Commercial Academy, more about Scott Scheel, and what's coming next.
That's awesome. Well, if you want to find out more, you can reach out to commercialacademy.com. You can check me out at official J. Scott Scheel, Instagram, Facebook. Our podcast will be out. It's the Huge Profits Podcast. So you can look us up there. You can just reach out. If you get the opportunity, watch some of our stuff online. We're constantly putting out content, things that you can learn from before you have to make an investment, and eventually help you find your way into our room. Because if you do, I know that your efforts will result in unbelievable outcomes. Sean, I want to thank you for letting me be here. I want to thank your group. I want to thank the environment here. It's been a joy, and thanks so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Thank you, as always, for tuning into the Real Mentors podcast. We'll have Scott and Commercial Academy's information in the bio, as always. Stay tuned, and let's get it.
God bless everybody.